started here when I was 18, and I worked from 18 to now. And it's a very beautiful place. It came like a part of my family for the 50 years I've been here.
I joined the Mass General as a surgical intern in 1966, having graduated from Harvard Medical School. I was fortunate enough to go to NIH in lieu of going to Vietnam.
All I remember the most was escaping from Cuba from Fidel Castro in 1966 with and Vietnam War and everything that was going on in the world at that time.
Most of us that began the journey in medicine in the 1970s were coming through a very tumultuous decade. The 1960s were when I was in college and in medical school, and were, of course, the largest upheaval in the United States until perhaps the present time.
Because I remember as a student nurse, I always wanted to have a voice in something. So we used to walk up Cambridge Street, and there were lots of demonstrations up at the top of Cambridge Street.
There was a fair amount of diversity of opinion as to what the nature of being an American should or would be.
I think it was just a little bit of a beginning of a disturbing time for the teenage population and the 20-year-olds, which I was at the time. But again, I didn't get involved in any of that because education, it was really important to be a student nurse. And we didn't have vacations. We went 3 straight years as a student nurse.
Wow. Boston was a very different place than it is now.
Our government center was then Scully Square.
Boston was terribly run down. Beacon Hill, they didn't clean the streets. It smelt a bit like Cairo from where I'd been in my youth. And the potholes on Storrow Drive were terrible. My little English sports car had to have its suspension redone every now and then.
You know, the MGH was such a remarkable place. Excellence shimmering in a city that was much, much less cosmopolitan than it is today.
But I was delighted to come to the General because they really wanted to know what you thought.
I just was so impressed with the breadth of the Mass General and the collegiality and
the character of the leaders was very remarkable then. Walter Bauer and Paul Russell. I think Churchill was the head of surgery when I was an intern.
They were very keen on the patient. The patient was special. The patient will tell you what you need to work on to try to help your field.
I started working here in July 1961. I came originally looking for a summer job, but that was 60 years ago.
I had a National Science Foundation fellowship, so I had the portability to go to any institution that I wanted to for a couple of years, for a 2-year period, and yet Dick Kitts was so persuasive and charismatic and welcoming that I picked MGH with no idea that I'd be here for 50 years.
Anesthesia research was relatively new. You know, we were only a department shortly before, and but Dick was very good at recruiting. Dick Kitts, the chairman.
Oh, right.
So he used to say to the research people, we have the highest density of indirect cost per square foot of anyone because basically we have so few square feet.
Yeah.
And a wonderful young engineer who was there took some chalk and drew a square on the floor around the chair that I was sitting in and labeled it as my office. And that was the first clue that space was a big issue in enabling research.
But we built many lifelong friendships during that time.
My department, Blood Transfusion Service, when I joined here, it was still a very new science. The blood bank had only existed for 19 years when I came here. It started down in the basement of the Mosley building. It had moved before I came. And I was under the immunologist, Dr. Grove Rasmussen, and then Charlie Huggins. And he's the one involving in the freezing and deglissing of frozen blood. And that played a big role in all the new open heart surgeries and the other high substance uses.
I worked in the medical intensive care unit, and the director at the time was Dr. Peter Yurchak, who unfortunately has passed away, who was a cardiologist. And I stood side by side with him, and we put the first PA line into a patient in the medical ICU. So that was 50 years ago.
Wow.
And he said to me, guaranteed, you will see medicine change. Medicine has changed tremendously. I do think that technology has enhanced how we treat patients.
When I was a senior resident on the inpatient service, Mass General installed what was at that time the second CT scanner in the country. And we were asking at the time, why is that necessary? We can diagnose a stroke without that. And now we look upon CT as a sort of a necessary adjunct and rely upon MR and PET imaging now. So there's been these widespread changes in the clinical care and delivery of care.
When I got to Mass General, to do a blood gas took 20 minutes in the middle of a surgery. That was a long time, you know. Now you have a pulse oximeter on your finger, and it's all instantaneous. It's just amazing. Ron Neubauer and Jeff Cooper in the lab that I shared with them were developing the first electronic anesthesia machine that did all kinds of things.
And then we got into ultrasound and transcranial Doppler for the patient. And then we got into antithrombotic therapy with the medical service, a great combo. We had a great, wonderful combination of neurology and medicine. And we changed the practice of medicine for antithrombotic therapy. It changed it in the world, as did diagnosis.
Vacuum tubes to computers. Nurses using monitors that ran with vacuum tubes that took time for them to warm up. And so the nurse would call and say, our monitor's not working. And we'd say, wait 10 minutes and call us again if it's still not working. When Ron was doing the development of flexible monitoring, then there were actual computers at the nurse's station being used, programmed in the way that they could be used as a central station to tell you where the monitor was that was complaining about a heart rate or something. And flexible monitoring thing was another one of the technical things that's bringing the technology to the patient.
And the moment where that idea arose was when an anesthesiologist had the experience of transporting a patient in a dark elevator, was not able to see that the patient was turning blue. He came down to the bioengineering unit to tell that story. He trusted us enough to tell the story. And to us, it was obvious that the answer was as simple as a Sony Walkman, which was a popular device at the time, to go with the patient. And we started to sketch on a blackboard, and that led to a sequence of events of collaborating with industry. Now that he would not have made a connection with anybody interested in the technology that might help in a situation like that, were it not that we were all in the same institution.
Yes, I think that's right. The MGH is the nidus where scientific progress and basic scientists work on a problem.
Clinical work and science go hand in hand, even basic science. There's a tradition of appreciation that goes through the departments, and many people who are clinicians are still involved in basic research. And that integration is part of the vitality of the institution.
I particularly was involved in much of the growth around the research activities during my tenure as chairman. We started the Charlestown facility, which of course became a major outpost for quality and quantity of work for the entire hospital.
Just taking a gamble on Charlestown, I remember the research committee meeting where they said, basically we think if we double space, you researchers will double research income. I'm like, wow. And they took that risk, and it took a while to pan out, but we did it. And I think that's the strong leadership and the ability of the trustees to grab opportunities.
Changes that have occurred at the MGH are fascinating. as it has become bigger and bigger and a colossal institution. The struggle is always to keep the excellence there and the spirit of camaraderie intact. I think we've done remarkably well.
For the most part, we all wear short coats, short white coats at Mass General. Certainly in the Department of Medicine, that's been the routine. And in many institutions, the short white coat was the signature, if you like, of a student or a medical student or an intern or resident. And the faculty would often wear long coats, but not at MGH. And I remember asking, why do we wear short coats? And the answer was, we're all students. And as a result, we're all mentors as well, because we're teaching each other.
Once you've received some good support or guidance, then you're better positioned to pass that information along and understand the value for younger people. That's one of life's satisfactions, when people that you've worked with in the past, either as co-mentors or as fellows, who step up and assume leadership positions, you take pride in their success.
I think in my experience about is communication. Everyone, if you have a good idea and they can benefit from that, everybody listens unless you implement it. I think that's the key to the success of MGH.
Among the things that make MGH great are not just the great physicians, but we have the best nursing staff, I think, in the world.
And they've taught our residents so much. I tell the residents, when you bring a patient to the floor, you bring them and you get the nurses around and make a plan with the nurses.
Physicians and nurses certainly have a huge relationship, and we both have voices in terms of patient care.
And when I was teaching pharmacology at the medical school, we're just teaching basic science. They said, no, what do I give the patient when? And I said, why are you so worried about that? Oh, I don't want to look foolish in front of the nurses.
Oh, wow. So we do have a voice.
The people, the patient, the nurses, the doctors, they all been like a family. At this time and at that time, everybody seems to be like a family. Everybody works together, and I wouldn't do it no other way again more than the years I spent here, because this is the best place in the world to work.
Even back in my early days as a trainee in the main lab, we all worked together, and we all for the good of the patients.
I always say to my fellows, patient care belongs in your grant. What are you doing for patient care? You may not be doing it this year, maybe 20 years from now, but what are you doing?
I mean, we have so many grateful patients. It's because I think people just rally around an individual patient, and the patients feel very, very comfortable being with us and are grateful for that. We even have patients that are willing to leave Cape Cod to come up to the Mass General.
Myself, I have many opportunities to work in the private sector or even many other institutions around the country. And I always choose to stay because the camaraderie between everyone.
But I think what I'm proud of is that I've been allowed to hang around this long and have it kind of be my choice. And it's like they always find something that I could be useful at.
When we consider retirement, the first thing we think is we're having a lot of fun, right, Sheila?
Absolutely.
I guess we could have to agree that we're all alive, and we're no longer youngsters, being somewhere between 50 and 55, 60 years at Mass General.
I think it's funny, the 50th anniversary, because they used to give out clocks, and this was my 30-year clock, and I figured if they kept it up, by the time I got to be 50 years anniversary, I'd have a grandfather clock. But
I will miss it because there's a time that I will have to leave. But that time haven't come right yet. but that's one thing I will miss about Mass General. Mass General is a wonderful place to work for.